too, but so far we've done good. I think we've gotten most of our recordings. Anyways, good morning, everyone. So
Right.
today I'd like to start off with just trying to understand where we are in terms of our development milestones, and after that, let's go into one of the questions, one of the open questions we had that we kind of uh, the we ended on the question last Thursday. So I want to bring that back up and see what solution we end up with for that one question. All right. So in terms of milestones, I'll quickly go over what the milestone is. Then I have a few questions for some of you here. Um, So we originally wanted our milestone to be a demo, and the demo was supposed to include an end-to-end scenario so that all the different components are worked on. End-to-end scenario of provisioning a bucket, creating access tokens for that bucket, and then providing the access tokens and the bucket information to a pod. Um, so we have a working version of this now. However, that was based on earlier designs of Cozy itself. After we finished implementing that, we had some more discussions about how Cozy should be designed, and some changes were made. So we are yet to uh, create a new working version with the new design because we've been waiting for some PRs to get merged, and people have been transitioning in and out of how much time they can spend on Cozy. But those things are stabilizing now, and we can have a little more stable progress for at least the next few weeks. Um, uh, for instance, Srini, just one of the developers, just changed his jobs, and so he was a little busy. Same thing with Rob. Rob has been working on the provisioner sidecar, and he was also busy lately. Um, anyway, so um, things are looking things are getting more stable now, like I said. So first thing I'd like to do is uh, I'd like to get an update from those who are here that are writing code to figure out where we are. um, Krish, can you go first and kind of remind me what you were working on and what's the progress of it?
hmm Yeah. So over the last week, I've been working on some changes to the spec API as well as the CSI driver, CSI adapter. And so, with the spec, I added some logic for faking the client for the gRPC server.
Mhm.
And so this is required in order to facilitate testing in the sidecar. Um, and so there was some codegen there, but that was pretty straightforward. And so more recently, I've just been adding some more utility methods in the API, as well as better logging and some minor design refactoring in the CSI adapter. The next thing I'll probably focus on will be updating the sidecar to use the newest version of the spec and API.
Right, right. So once we do that, we should have well, code that is untested but is supposed to work with the new design, correct?
Yeah, that's the plan.
When I say untested, I mean end to end untested.
Mm, yep.
Um, yeah, but yeah, no, that sounds good, Krish. So if I understand correctly, after having added changes to move to the new design of the APIs, both in spec and in the API repo. You're now moving the other repositories, downstream repositories that use these like API and spec to start using the new version. Correct?
Yep.
Okay, sounds good. All right. So Blaine is here today. Hi, Blaine. How are you?
I'm okay, thanks.
Um, I know you said if you get a chance, you might be able to work on the the controller design. Maybe take a look at it and make changes or bless it as it's okay. Did you get a chance to look at it?
I haven't looked at it more since, I guess, just sort of initially looking into it. I guess my thoughts on it were just around like if controller runtime makes sense to use, if there is some boilerplate that could be avoided and some like, I think you mentioned a race condition. Maybe you had already finished it. But
yeah,
using it, the controller runtime might help with just having a little bit less code to maintain.
True.
If I,
Mhm.
a while ago, I was thinking, I considered bringing up using controller runtime as well. I was wondering back then whether or not that may impact inclusion of the controller code in Kubernetes core controller manager at some point in time.
Could you repeat that? I didn't follow.
So the intent is still to have the cozy controller being part of Kubernetes core, right? Not as something you need to install in a cluster.
Right.
So I was wondering to which extent using controller runtime could prevent the code that is currently written to be merged into controller manager, or is controller manager nowadays using controller runtime as well?
Okay, so controller manager does not use controller runtime. When we say we want to be a part of upstream Kubernetes, it would still be a separate component that gets released along with Kubernetes. However, it's not going to be a part of the core repo except for the kubelet.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, because there is really no need for it.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah. That being said, if we were writing code in the controller manager, which we've done before as a part of different SIGs, in the name of uniformity, we might think it makes more sense to just use what they already use. However, I would say we should go with whichever approach is superior in terms of flexibility and flexibility really. If controller runtime is better than what we already have in Kubernetes controller manager today, then I would say we should use controller runtime, but I don't know as of yet. Yeah. Okay. So, all right, let me quickly see who else is here. Srini is here. Hi, Srini. How are you?
Hi, Sid. Good morning.
Good morning. Did you, so you were working on the CSI adapter, right?
I started looking at the CSI adapter. Yeah, I have a few more tasks on the central controller that I need to spend time, but yeah.
Okay. Could you remind us what you were working on just so that I get a sense of where we are at?
Central controller, I fixed the, I added the delete part. And then now the delete, you remember that we had those finalizers for the delete. So I added the finalizers. That PR I needed to update because the spec has changed. So I updated. That part is done. The PR still needs to be reviewed, but my plan is to get the admission controller PR in, and then there is one more task on the central controller that.
What is this admission controller for?
There are 3 PRs that I need to still finish on the central controller. One is the admission controller piece that needs to go in, and then the UTE test. PR. That makes sense. Yeah. So once those three are in, then I'll start looking at the CSI adapter.
So what kind of admission controllers are we talking about? So I know we have.
This is a basic check for the bucket class, default bucket class. So other than that, that can be then anything can be added once we have that in place. So,
okay. Yeah. So I have a question here about the admission controls because I've been thinking about it. And do we want to prevent updates on buckets unless bucket mutation policy is set to allow? I mean, we don't have the concept of bucket mutation policy yet, but just a theoretical question at this point.
Theoretically, it can be done, but thinking about should we do that or not? So if we decide it should be immutable, then
yeah, I'm saying something like that. So if someone were to try to update parameters in a bucket, and the bucket mutation policy was on that bucket was originally set to deny, then we should we just reject the request in the admission controller itself, or how should we do it? Is there any benefit to
that? If we don't do it in the admission controller, then we do not have any good way of indicating to the user that this is not allowed, right? I mean, having the controller check would not make much sense, because then
I see what you mean. Yeah, if we didn't reject it, then we might have a bucket object that's actually not the source of truth of what's actually in the bucket, or what was originally there before it was mutated. However, even the mutated thing would be wrong. Like the mutated bucket values in that bucket object would be pointing to the wrong values.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's okay to do. Like if you were to add an admission controller for buckets, not allowing any updates to buckets that, just any updates right now, and then in the future if we add bucket mutation policy.
Yeah, we can make it granular.
Yeah. I think I'm agreeing with what you're saying, Sid. Even if we don't have a mutation policy, having update admission controller gives the user the error sooner, and maybe the error will be clearer rather than a user thinking they've updated a BR or an admin thinking that she's updated a BC. You get a clear message saying it's an immutable resource.
Right.
And I think then people will go, well, that's weird. I don't know why I can't update it. There might be issue raised, a dialogue, maybe a use case for mutability for certain fields. It sets the framework for allowing mutation on a field by field basis down the road.
Right.
But isn't the plan, assuming we don't initially implement mutation, to not put any fields that could in principle be mutated except on the storage class?
Right. The idea is, even with that, we don't want to allow any changes to buckets at this point.
Well, but more importantly, like Kubernetes doesn't want to get involved at an API level with stuff that Kubernetes isn't interested in managing, right? We want to pass through stuff from the bucket.
This is why I asked the question.
Yeah, and just like ignore the rest. Like it's not relevant to Kubernetes. It might be relevant to the end user, so they put it in their bucket class.
Right. But bucket has fields that are not that are not parameters. Like let's say you have some other bucket fields. Like let me open that up. I'm sure there are fields on the bucket that don't have anything to do with parameters, but those people that update them.
Yeah, maybe that's where we need to have the discussion. Is like, do we need all the stuff that we're currently putting into the API, or can we just drop some of it?
That is absolutely important to have, because given that we've said we're not going to deal with fields that Kubernetes doesn't care about. Why should we have those fields?
Yeah, I feel like less is more when it comes to API design.
Agreed, 100% agreed. I mean, stuff like allowed namespaces. See, okay, so yes, let's remove fields that we represent, like anonymous access mode, but really we don't care about. I agree, we should remove them. But coming into stuff like allowed namespaces, we shouldn't allow people to update this value. I mean, in the sense, if they either we say that if they update it, it's your problem, you've said it wrong, or we should just disallow it by having an admission controller that just doesn't allow updates to this.
Wait, this is on the bucket, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the only person who could edit this would be an admin anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And if the admin gets it wrong, what's he supposed to do?
Well, they won't get it wrong if you have an admission controller. Is that, like, my question is more along the lines of, is that even something that we follow in Kubernetes? Like with storage classes, they're supposed to be immutable.
Storage classes?
No.
They're immutable.
Right, they're immutable. So
but further than that, like storage classes are only consulted at creation time. So even if you could mutate them, it wouldn't matter. Like the reason they're immutable is to avoid the confusion that would result from people mutating them and nothing happening.
Fair. So in this case, allowed namespace is brought in from the bucket class, and once it is set on the bucket, if someone were to go and update it, what should our response be? Should we?
So this seems like, I mean, it all depends on if this is the correct mechanism for sharing buckets across namespaces, which I understand is up for debate given some of Tim's feedback. But assuming this is the right way, I don't see why it wouldn't be mutable. I mean, things like the deletion policy are inherited from the bucket class, but then they are mutable typically, because if the admin changes his mind,
and allowed namespaces is in the bucket instance too. It's copied from the BC to the bucket.
Yeah.
Remember, that's what I mean. Yeah. So with the snapshot, when you have the deletion policy in your snapshot class, and you take a snapshot and it gets the deletion policy from the snapshot class, but then if the admin wants to change it, he can, because the admin is always right. And all that field is telling you is, what should I do when I delete this thing, right? So if the admin wants to do something different, there's no reason not to give him what he wants. Similarly here, if the purpose of the allowed namespaces is so that some controller knows what can bind to this, if the admin changes his mind, I don't see any reason to not give him what he wants.
Fair enough.
Because the alternative is the admin has to just delete the whole thing and go make a new one, which he has the power to do.
But you might have to lose bucket data in that process, which is not good.
No. I mean, the admin is all powerful, right? He can just delete the object and replace it with a new object that is identical in every respect except different value for that field.
Sure.
And you can't stop him from doing that. So, like, given that we're empowered to interpret the change that he wants, like, we should just let him make it. The main reason to make something immutable.
But here we are saying we are keeping the physical bucket, right? It's really just to change this on the bucket spec without changing the underlying bucket. So I mean, not without deleting it, right? We keep it, but just change the namespaces, some permissions on that bucket, but keep it, right? So, but I think the question I have is, do we know is this supported by everyone? All the object store can support this kind of thing. You can actually change it afterwards. Is this not a problem at all?
Well, allowed namespaces is internal to Kubernetes.
Yeah, it's all a Kubernetes thing. It has nothing to do with the storage. So
you don't really have to change that. Okay.
The way I look at it is, the reason to make something immutable is if it would be hard for Kubernetes to affect the change. But if it's easy for Kubernetes to affect the change, then do it.
Okay, so let's talk about protocol structure then. So whatever is in the protocol structure is what ends up going to the application.
Yeah.
So how about that?
One probably can't. I don't think it can. The problem is, do you know the underlying storage can change it? I guess that's the question.
Well, in protocol, let's say, region is set. See, the idea is protocol is supposed to be the source of truth for how to access the bucket. Now, if we say admin can go and change it, one, we might be allowing them to do something that Cozy got wrong, or they didn't set initially, or something like that. But two, that could also be a bad thing if they make the wrong change.
Well, the way I would look at it is the protocol is information that's going to get passed through to pods that are attached to this bucket. If a pod was attached at the time you change the protocol, like what is supposed to happen? Like obviously you can't go muck with a pod that is running. At least I think you can't.
Yeah.
So like that would be a good reason to say, okay, you can't change the protocol because if there's any pods that are using it, like your changes will not be reflected in those pods. And so it's easier just to disallow mutation of the field and say, like, this is a once and done field. And if you want something different, you basically need to go create a new bucket and attach your new pods to the new bucket, and then they'll get the new values. And that cleans up any confusion around what to do about existing pods.
Okay, but so in this case of protocol, we're saying that admin can't make mistakes. Like admin can't change it even if, I mean, they really wanted to, they could, but.
I mean, I'm not opposed to allowing it, but like if we can't define what's supposed to happen in response to that, then that's a problem for us.
A new value goes into new parts. It's like no schedule instead of like no. It's like only update on new schedule, new part that start up with the protocol rather than existing ones. I mean, that could be a possibility.
But the bucket spec is, you're saying this is like many to one. The bucket is not, you're not going to create new ones. You are just.
Well, in the sense that you could have one bucket that's accessed by different applications. So let's say you have one application which mounts the bucket, which gets all the bucket information, and then the admin goes and changes something in the protocol, and then a second application requests this, gets access to the same bucket. In that case, the question is, one, should we even allow the admin to make such a change, or anyone to make that change in the protocol? Or two, if so, what's the behavior?
We should look at what happens with PV specs, because that's the.
I think we need to be careful. We actually just run into a bug with the access mode in the PVC. So we found out that so in PVC, you are not allowed to change the access mode. However, in PV, you are actually allowed to change PV access mode. Not only that, after you change that, the access mode in PVC is also changed. So now that becomes a bug. It's a problem.
So you mean like when you say access mode, like read write once, read write many, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So actually, there's a bug that we actually need to try to figure out how to fix it, because our customer actually opened this bug. So I'm saying we need to be careful to say what you can allow to change in the bucket.
Fair enough.
But my inclination is to follow the PVC PV model. Where if PVs are generally mutable in terms of the low level like CSI information that comes back from the CSI driver, then we could copy that. But if they're not, then we would probably want to copy that behavior, because it's complicated. I mean, if we did allow it to change, then it would have all the problems you just mentioned, that it would only affect new pods, and the old pods would get the old values, etc.
And that's
Shing, I'm curious about the issue that you raised, Shing, but we shouldn't discuss it here. We should discuss it somewhere else.
Yeah. That's actually the issue. We need to investigate that one. So but actually it's a problem, because the volume is already created. That's only supports one mode. Now it's changed in the PV. It's actually not compatible with the volume itself. So it's a problem.
But there are situations where having the ability to change it gets you out of a jam, where like if there was
so maybe then that maybe should be a capability or something, because our driver does not support that.
Well, no. I mean, so anyone who makes that kind of a change would be
admin.
They would be taking the risk onto themselves. Like they would have to know.
No, but in this case, the PVC was also changed, which is pretty strange. That's actually not.
That I have no understanding of. I don't understand how that could happen. But
that's not designed actually. I just checked with them.
But assuming that it wasn't that way, and it was just that you were allowed to mutate the PV's value, like I can see cases where that's a nice feature.
Yeah, but the problem is the problem is in the PV. We never really go call the driver, like even if even if it's for static provisioning case, right?
No.
Doesn't even check.
This wouldn't. Right. The whole point
That's a
is
problem,
like,
actually.
changing the access mode is not a feature that you allow, but like if you happen to know that Kubernetes has the wrong value relative to what actually exists.
I know what you're saying. This can go both ways, but then so in our case, this is the problem. We actually have to go do something to prevent user from making this mistake.
Yeah, we don't want users to think that like mutating the protocol in the bucket would actually make anything happen, right? Like we would need to be very clear about, this is set by the controller. You can change it, but if you change it to the wrong values, all bets are off, right? It's on you because you screwed up your bucket.
Exactly.
But there are situations where, like, due to software upgrades and new revisions of the cozy driver, the value of your bucket might not be perfectly accurate, and you might want to fix it. And
but if that's the case, like we should call it like bucket upgrade policy or something. Like we should have a way to upgrade buckets.
No, that's over engineering, man. Just
no, I think that's actually better, safer, because otherwise you run into this situation. Like the existing PD design, I think that's a problem. They assume admin knows everything. We found again and again in customers' environment that's not true. A lot of bugs opened because actually the customers actually have access to those non-namespace object. They change it and made mistakes. They didn't know that.
Yeah. And I think for now, like Ben is saying, I think bucket upgrade is a little much.
I mean, it's the philosophy of, do you give the users a lot of rope and let them hang themselves or not?
Yeah.
I would say it was
like
simple and not to give them that rope. The rope.
Yeah. When you give people rope, some people will make very bad decisions, and that's always a problem with usability and support. But like in Kubernetes in general, we try to just say, here's the API, use it the way that we documented, and everything will go right. And if you go off on, and try to cook up your own solution or hack on stuff that you're not supposed to hack on, we don't promise that it'll work right.
Yeah. And if usability is, I mean, as the developers of the Kubernetes platform itself, I think we should design for maximum flexibility rather than usability. And I'm coming from a very like vendor perspective, saying that usability should be something that vendors figure out. I mean, vendors can write controllers to make this even more usable. They could add whatever admission controllers they wanted. But we would provide maximum flexibility. Like, you can do whatever you want, but if you break it, it's on you.
Yeah, and my guiding principle for the mutability of fields is like, it should be mutable unless there's a good reason it shouldn't be. And the kind of thing that qualifies as a good reason is if it's totally not obvious what would happen in response to that, or if it's going to create new paradoxes, then you'd say, okay, you can't change that. But I would default to mutable.
I get that. But it still doesn't answer the question of what to do about protocol.
Yeah, I don't want to take a hard stand one way or the other.
Yeah.
If it was mutable, we would just have to document that, like, look, this is, if you change it, it's not going to affect any existing pods, etc. And if you make it immutable, then we just have to live with the fact that the only workaround for when it has the wrong values, people are going to be deleting these things and recreating them with new values.
Yeah, that sounds pretty bad.
That's not going to create new problems.
Yeah, that sounds pretty bad, to be honest. Like, let's say, we got the region wrong or something, and so for instance, okay, so this, I think we should leave it mutable. I just thought of a use case where that might be needed. So say, for instance, you are migrating from one cluster to another, and you migrate the bucket request, obviously not the bucket itself. And one cluster is on the cloud, one is on-prem. So say you're using AWS and MinIO. The concept of regions are not utilized in MinIO while provisioning buckets. I mean, yeah, in the general scenario, everything falls into one region. You could create geographically separated clusters, and MinIO uses the regions, but let's just say there's only one region, and the default region is US East 1. And, if there's only one region, it's kind of gets ignored. But during an IO call, if you set the region wrong, like when creating the bucket, the region gets ignored because there's only one region. But then when creating buckets, or when using the buckets IO calls, you set the region wrong. I'm not sure, but it's possible that you won't be able to access the bucket because it'll think you're trying to access the bucket that doesn't exist. So in a scenario like that, let's say you've created a bucket, put some data, whatever, brought in some data into it somehow, and it might just be easier to go to the protocol and update the region rather than having to go create the whole thing again.
Yeah,
So,
and someone who knew
scenario.
exactly what they were doing could do that safely, and
Mhm.
someone who didn't know what they were doing could royally screw everything up.
Mhm.
So
We're back
those
to
are
square one.
the two edges of that sword.
So Shring, so you're saying it's better to prevent them from making mistakes, like that's what stuff
Yeah,
like.
That's what I thought. That's what I think. It's actually, I think it's better to start with immutable. So I'm like opposite with what I'm saying. Unless if those changes are like retention policy, that I agree. You don't really have to go check. And then the allow namespace, I think seems to be fine. The protocol, if those things, you might need to go check if your underlying object storage can support it or not, those type of things. I think it's dangerous to just allow them to change this. You may end up have something that is broken right away.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, if you change it and then you clone a bucket and then you're like, oh, I made a wrong change, so you go back and update the original, but then it's not going to propagate to the clones. Yeah, stuff like that can also happen. Yeah, now that I think about it, so I think it might be okay to say, you know what, if you got the values wrong when you provisioned the bucket, it's on you now, so you got to go create a new bucket to fix it, rather than saying, here, go ahead and make the change.
And to be clear, the way that you get things wrong is if you have like an old version of, all these values come from the Cozy plugin.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have to have a buggy Cozy plugin or a Cozy plugin that was missing some important feature
Mm-hmm.
in order to get incorrect values.
And we don't have control of the plugin though, so.
But vendors will write buggy plugins without a doubt.
Yeah, without a doubt, yeah. I mean, we make mistakes too. Anyway, so yeah, I think we're leaning towards saying this is immutable.
I don't feel strongly about it.
Okay, let's go with that. I think Shing feels strongly about it, and when I think about that one use case of having clone copies, having different data, that seems like a very bad problem to deal with.
I would recommend looking at how we handle PV specs.
Okay, how is that? If someone can go over it.
I don't have a test bed set up where I can just easily go test this, but
Oh, you mean that way?
yeah, I mean you could just go provision some PVs and try to edit or create some PVCs, let them bind, and try to edit the PV directly and see if it blows up. I don't.
So there are certain fields. I think most fields are actually immutable. Some fields are mutable. So you can actually go check, because I did some experiment with some. Not all fields are mutable, definitely.
How do you make them immutable?
The API level is, I think there were some checks. There was a.
I think you have to write a validating webhook that rejects edits to those fields.
Admission control.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you are CRD, yes, you have to write it. But this is in tree, right? So in tree, so it's actually relatively easy to prevent it from happening.
Right. I mean, like it's the same thing, right? We probably have an admission controller in KubeAPI server itself.
Yeah. So that's, but kind of built in, so it's easier for us to just write some tests.
But if you have any validating webhook at all, adding these particular checks to it is very simple. It's if you don't have a validating webhook, it's hard.
Fine, yeah. Is that, did he say actually, maybe,
It doesn't say in the spec,
Yeah.
in the API, but I bet it's there in actual Kubernetes. Get the spelling wrong.
I think you have it
It's
done.
going to be hard. It's going to be hard to find that code. Otherwise, I would look for the code myself.
Oh, I've written something here,
Let's
so
see if it's
I feel like
maybe
I'll be able to find it, but I
as a
might be
node,
wrong.
but we don't know. Yeah. See if they have nodes there, APIs.
Yeah. Admission.
Oh,
Oh, it's changed. Yeah, I wrote it like 4 years ago or something.
okay. Oh, I'm just saying that maybe take a look of the if you want to check a PV and see if the API definition actually mentioned which is mutable or which
No,
one.
I just checked. Yeah, it doesn't mention
Not
it.
there? Oh, okay.
No, persistent volume.
Because I know there is some field like I think there is some node affinity thing. I know that is actually, we would like that to be mutable, but then that is actually immutable or something. So I know that it's a different, depending on which field you're looking at, basically. Now, this one is immutable because we already tested this one, but then we have this problem
This
that
is mutable now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's storage class name. This should be immutable, right?
No, you cannot. I don't think you can change this now.
Okay. So okay.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mention it though. So I guess what we should do is like you were saying, validating webhook admission controller.
Like the node affinity, that one is immutable. That one, so some of those are mutable, some are immutable. Yeah, this one is. We actually hope this one can be changed, but then this one is actually immutable. So
wow.
so it can go. Yeah, the problem can go both ways. So depending on.
Mm.
So you probably really need to look at exactly, what field you want it to be mutable, immutable, and what's the pros and cons of allowing it.
Yeah, I think we should start tagging go struct like with immutable or mutable fields. That'll be the best documentation for it, and we can respond to it in code. We'll do that in Cozy. Yeah, we'll say, we'll have a parameter like immutable or just immutable. If it exists, it's true, something like that.
Do we already have the validating webhook framework in place where we can implement that kind of stuff, or is that beta material?
We need to write one, right? So that's the
alpha.
So that's like we are like for snapshot we added that.
For snapshot we added it like only for GA.
Right. We added that later. Yeah.
So for alpha and beta there was no validation at all.
Right. Yes.
I see. Well, Srini is currently working on admission controller, so I would think we should just, at least have the controller in place. Maybe not have all the rules, but yeah.
It's also as long as we're in alpha, we can easily change it if we're like, oh, we screwed up here. It's once we get to beta, it'll be harder.
Yeah.
But even then, like changing an admission controller rule is easier than like changing a field.
Right. Oh, so you're saying we shouldn't have that struct tag here? I was thinking we'll add a new struct tag, like, here, like a field tag.
For what? I'm sorry.
It's immutable.
I don't think the code gen cares. This is all for the code gen.
Yeah, that's not. Yeah, you don't add it here. Actually, you need to have an extra.
But no, we to code gen we can like just like we added here. We'll just add. The good thing about Go is
you know what? Hold on a second. Actually, maybe that's actually available now. I'll have to check. Maybe the latest the API, the schema maybe supports that. I have to double check. Yeah, nice. I think there are certain things we still have to use the validation hook, but certain things like mutable, immutable might be already built in. So I will have to actually check the snapshot. I forgot.
Yeah.
Code gen. You can find that out. Yeah.
Yeah. If not, we can quickly write something that'll do it for us. Code generator, I think.
It might not be the code gen. It might be that if it gets embedded in the metadata for the Go structs, then maybe the off the shelf validating webhook knows how to look at the metadata on those structs and implement certain checks.
Yeah,
for free.
Looking at metadata is pretty straightforward. Like it's just in the reflect package. That's how like JSON does it. Struct field. Yeah, there it is. Struct field has a tag. So just look at the tag. there. Yeah, so you can have custom tags, whatever, color blue. Yeah, so we can quickly, like you said, we'll have the admission controller see what fields are coming in, and if the struct tag for that field is immutable, then we don't allow it. Automated and clean, and we'll know it works every time. Sounds good. Like, what do you all think?
It should work. I
Yeah.
mean, I have a sneaking suspicion we're going to want it to be mutable later, but I don't have a problem starting this way.
Okay.
That's alpha, right? So it's fine.
Yeah, it's alpha.
Yeah, I have that same suspicion too. But again, the cost of getting mutability wrong or getting the changes wrong is very high, if you ask me. That's the reason I want to make it immutable, actually. Like if this field is changed in one copy of the bucket but not in the others, and you want to change it back or something, it gets tricky. So yeah, I want to start with immutable. All right, so coming back to the original question that we had, which is, we were talking about reducing or taking out some fields that really Kubernetes just treats as pass-through. For instance, anonymous access mode. I vote that we should remove it and not have it here. Rather, it can be a part of the protocol or parameters.
It feels like a parameters thing because you set it once at creation time, and it's not relevant to the individual workloads.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Because the workloads are going to obtain access through the mechanism of being bound to the bucket. That's the whole point of the bucket pod binding is to gain access.
But there could be some scenario where they might want to know if it's publicly. Well, I don't think that this is the best way to give it to them anyways. Yeah, no, fair enough. What about, why should it be in parameters now? Because earlier we had we had a pretty restrictive definition of parameters, which is fields that apply to bucket creation that are vendor specific. Anonymous access mode seems more universal to me. Oh, it is more universal. My question is, should it be in protocol or parameters?
So, sorry, I was running an experiment. I just proved to myself that the PVs are immutable. So good point of comparison. What was the question?
So anonymous access mode, should it go in parameters or protocol?
I say parameters.
Mm-hmm.
It's an opaque thing that Kubernetes doesn't need to know about.
But that could be set of the protocol fields too.
Oh, but you already have a parameters that is opaque, right? You need.
Yeah, the parameters we defined it narrowly. We said it's for vendor specific fields.
Isn't protocol supposed to be like first class field?
Yeah, protocol first class fields. Yes.
Yeah, then.
So right? I'm willing to have arguments about the individual components of protocol too, and whether we should take them out.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that also.
What?
I think that's important.
First class, you mean?
Sorry?
I say what Ben was saying. What do you mean? You mean move those fields out, make them first class outside of the protocol struct?
No, just dropping them, right?
Like if we don't really need part
if they're not necessary for the functioning of the sidecar or the functioning of the bind controller or anything, then why are they there?
Fair enough. All right. So with that argument, Ben, I guess I know what you're saying. So this goes away, and we expect it to be passed through parameters. I like that actually. Anonymous access mode goes away, and then going into the protocol struct itself. The definition of version is kind of tricky right now.
I do not like version in here and would like to see it removed.
Me too. But I also want to get a sense of what Sheng thinks, and Jeff also.
Version.
Well, some of those changes are in the KEP. If you guys could look at the PR on the KEP, several that have just been mentioned are in one of the commits on that KEP PR. So I'm just waiting for reviews on that.
Okay.
What do you mean? You mean recommendations to remove these things, or?
Yeah, this discussion is sort of a repeat of earlier ones. And in an earlier one, we said allowed namespaces anonymous, the anonymous access mode was should not be a first class field in the API. And so as part of my KEP PR, I have taken that out. And there were similar things like default for a bucket class. As a first class field, the feedback from Tim's review is that we should do what is done for storage classes and make it an annotation rather than a first class field. So I've made about a half a dozen of changes to API and RPC fields in the latest KEP PR.
Okay. And what about the version field?
No, that's a new one. But I'm happy to add, that would be a good place to collect feedbacks in a public setting where, for instance, Ben, you could read the PR and add your comments on the changes, but then also add a comment that, hey, why isn't version just like anonymous access mode? If you're getting rid of anonymous access, get rid of version. Things like that would be useful.
I agree. This is a good forum to have that conversation. But
I'm not opposed to writing up this feedback in the KEP, but I think I'm interested in finding contrarian viewpoints on the version field before I just say this is worthless, let's get rid of it.
Right. Yeah, that was my point of view to asking everyone. So Shing, I'll give you some background on what this version field was thought of originally and why it doesn't make sense anymore. So originally we thought the version would be so for instance, with AWS API, we have a date as a version like 2011 something, and that version, even though it's not passed in through any of the calls to AWS itself, it denotes what version of AWS API we're using. And then the thing, it gets tricky when we go into S3 protocol, because inside of S3 protocol there's another version field. Oh, we luckily removed it. We actually had one more version field, which we've taken out actually. So that version was supposed to be something specific to S3, and it started getting tricky.
Well, the signature version field. Oh, I'm getting a weird echo.
Let me. Go ahead, Ben.
Okay. I think it's coming from Jeff's microphone.
You said it twice.
I don't know.
Please mute.
Jeff is not muted yet. Jeff, okay, let's see.
There, okay.
Oh,
that's better. Okay, so the protocol version, or sorry, the signature version is absolutely necessary, and because today we have S3 v2 and S3 v4, and we don't know if there will ever be an S3 v5, but if there was, you definitely need to know about it, right?
Yeah, you need to know about it to make every call. Yeah. You need to sign it. So
like that version, I absolutely support keeping here. Did you say there was another version that
there was another version here?
What was that?
It's tricky. I couldn't tell you, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah. And
was it the Amazon SDK version?
Something like, no, it wasn't Amazon SDK version. So like AWS API version.
And this is only specific to AWS. You don't have that for.
Well, no, like the whole point of S3 is it's supposed to be for anything that supports S3. It's not supposed to be AWS specific.
Yeah, like this, like this. This was the other version field.
Okay, yeah. So initially, this was the version that was suggested we put in the top level version at the top level of the protocol, something like that. And I never saw the point in that. So I agree. I would be happy to remove it. And if Jeff wants me to write that in the KEP, I'm happy to put that feedback there. But yeah, I don't see how a workload could consume that value and get anything useful from it.
Agreed.
And I don't see how a Cozy plugin could supply a value that was meaningful to workloads in that field.
Yeah,
because all of these values have
Cozy
to come
plugin-
from the plugin, right?
all the application could use is the actual protocol, like signature version, but
Yeah.
nothing more than that.
Yeah.
All right, so yeah, I think we're more or less in agreement, me and you, Ben. Jeff, you didn't give us a response for what your thoughts are. You said we could comment on the KEP, but what do you think about removing version?
I don't know enough about it.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm very open to listening to both sides of it, and then forming an opinion. Right now, I don't have an opinion.
Okay.
I remember. Oh, we're getting an echo from Jeff again. Thanks, Jeff. I don't know what's wrong with your audio, but thank you. I remember that the gentleman who was arguing for it, and it was a very AWS S3 specific motivation. And it had to do with like knowing whether certain extensions were available after a certain version. And my argument back was like, well, if we want to support specific extensions, like we should do that, not just try to convey that in some version number.
Right. And the thing is, there is no such thing like specific extension based on some version number. Either it's a part of the S3v2 or S3v4, and that is a standardized API. If it's not in them, then it doesn't mean anything. Like if there is an extension.
But AWS does implement like funny extensions.
Well, the extensions could be for other things like authentication, but
yeah.
But we support only one authentication model right now, tokens, and later on IAM. Like those two work with any version, so I don't see.
Right, I'm just representing the stance of the guy whose name I can't remember. The argument was that if you want to take advantage of AWS's special magic, then you need to know if the version is high enough. And I say, well, no, let's just not do that.
And also, why is this version at this level? But you're saying this is it's a S3 thing. It's not really for Azure.
No, well, the idea was that maybe every protocol would have something like an S3 version, and so put the common stuff up here. But yeah, I think we can not do that. I don't know if you can make the same argument about the name field. I mean, obviously we need the. Oh no, I see. The name field is your struct discriminator, your union discriminator. That's not the bucket name. That's the protocol name.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind. Yeah, so yeah, all you need at the top level is the union discriminator, and then all of the different union members, and version can go.
Agree.
And I'm happy to write that in the KEP.
Okay, let's do that then, Ben. Please write that in the KEP, and Jeff, please remove it from the KEP and remove that field from the KEP.
I will in the review, but I just want to keep it as much public as we can so it doesn't look like changes are being made without community input.
I mean, the community is right here in front of you, Jeff.
Yeah, that's the same.
The community.
There are people.
Community meeting, but not everybody's here.
Yeah. No. There's another reason it's like I want to encourage more people to join us.
The GitHub is very good for equal voice when people can't attend meetings in person, when there's time zone differences or other things come up, and they can take certain meetings on a regular basis. And so the GitHub is very good for bringing in other voices.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that it's more searchable. There's more history. No one wants to go read or listen to hours of meetings on YouTube that have been recorded. So I don't disagree there, but there has to be a balance though, because this is higher bandwidth than GitHub reviews by a long shot.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for major things, like API changes, I think it's good to write it down. I think, but other things, I guess, we don't need to necessarily write everything down. For this version field, let's just write it down. And just make a comment on the KEP. That should be good enough.
I just see an update from Yang saying that the access mode on PV seems like it should not be editable. There seems like to be something missing from the validation.
Mm.
We'll see if we should block that or not.
So going forward, so within the individual protocol structs, I don't think we should go in and check what should be. I mean, like, I don't know if we should start reasoning about removing these fields at this point yet. Like the exercise we started off with was seeing what's unnecessary and then taking it off. I think
Okay, yeah, but the remaining fields in the S3
the union.
union
Mhm.
makes sense to me, right? You need all four of those. Let me see them again real quick. You need the endpoint, you need the bucket name,
You need the region.
you need the region, you need the signature version.
Yeah.
And then of course you need
Credentials.
the access key
But that goes in a
and the
separate
secret,
channel.
right? But they go in a separate channel. So yeah, those are the things you need.
Yeah. Yeah, these are absolutely needed, yes. And you know, some people might say the region is a part of the endpoint. That's not necessarily true, especially say the endpoint is like the gov cloud in you know AWS. It's a single endpoint, but then the region can be any one of the many regions it supports, rather than the general aws.amazon.com.
And if you're running a S3 API on a port other than 443, where would you communicate that information? As in the endpoint field?
Mm-hmm.
You'd have a colon in the endpoint field?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So it should be a URL. Maybe should we make it a URL.url?
I don't know. I mean, it's subtle.
I mean, it'll naturally lead to adding, you know, validation. Because, you know, when you parse it, it can lead to a parse error.
But like, are we going to allow HTTP as opposed to HTTPS?
But that's custom validation. Like with this, we don't check even. And HTTP is a valid value, Ben, because you know, in test clusters and you know in air gap setups, people just use HTTP. I mean, not to AWS cloud itself, but say you know Minio or some other on-prem.
I'm just trying to think like there probably are implementations that don't even support HTTP, but that wouldn't matter here because they would just never return that as their endpoint. So that would be fine. I guess the problem would be if there were clients that couldn't support HTTP or clients that couldn't support a port other than 443, then supplying those things here would break those clients.
Wait, how so?
I mean, if the client hard codes port 443 and then this thing tells you it's running on a different port, what are you going to do?
Well, that's not Cozy's problem though.
Right. I'm just saying, like, should we, you know, the consumer of this information is an object storage client, and if object storage clients have made a choice not to support something, maybe we should ask why. But if everyone supports HTTP and non-standard ports, then it's a perfectly reasonable thing to allow in general.
I mean, Amazon doesn't support non-standard ports, but it's Amazon.
Right.
Same with like major cloud providers non-standard ports, but well, actually, I couldn't even say that about Amazon because Amazon has an on-prem version of Amazon itself where you get the whole cloud on-prem, and there, I guess even there it's HTTPS, but it's a custom endpoint.
And you can stick a proxy in front of Amazon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that too.
We got a time check. Is that what you're saying, Xing?
Yes.
Oh, we're already out of time. Okay.
Yeah.
Quick comment on this one as well. Is signature version unique? As in, from what I recall, at some point you could do both version 2 as well as version 4 signatures for an S3 request.
Well, no,
currently it's only v4. But it's up to the client to choose.
Yeah, so yeah, that's for the client to choose. So if both are supported, that means S3 v4. So the S3 v2 signature was easily, I believe, you know, people could, you know, without knowing what the actual key was, you could actually end up signing it. So false client could pretend to be a valid client. and S3 V4 is a new version. And at a point, both are supported
Yep.
to allow clients to migrate over from one to the other. So that was like an interim thing. But right now, I think it's still true where you can use both. Like Minayo supports both as well, but the expectation is it'll get fully deprecated and not function in the future.
But what happens if there is a V5 and there is a transient